Hello, good morning, and a very warm welcome to Thinking Out Loud at HOK. We're so very happy to see you all here in our studio. And of course, as it's Valentine's Day, this makes our welcome to you especially more lovely. My name is Farah, and I'm the marketing principal for HOK's London studio. And so to our speaker this morning. David was born in Newcastle. He has always been inspired by the arts and influenced by his father, who had a strong interest in sports and maths. David was immersed in culture and the sporting life from a young age. He studied maths, arts, and physics at A-level. He knew that he loved making and chose to study an architecture degree at Sheffield University, followed by Part 2 and 3 at Newcastle University, gaining a first. David was scouted by Anshan and Allen, an American London-based architects firm who has read his thesis on integrated cancer centres, and subsequently invited David to work on the Northern Centre for Cancer Treatment in Newcastle. Since his early days, David has worked across the globe, including San Francisco, Riyadh, Kuwait, and Dublin. David's portfolio includes the design of 2 schools in Westminster, 150 Bishopsgate over at the City, and Elephant Park in Southwark with Lendlease. David also ran his own company as an architect developer in Sweden for 5 years and delivered a residential scheme north of Malmö, which has been built and subsequently sold on. Since joining HOK in 2016, David has led on securing planning permission for Elephant Park, a 25-story tower, and of course has naturally led on a number of competitions, including a 50-story tower in Kuwait, a number of sites here in London with TfL, and a competition for urban regeneration of Canning Town and its environs. David is passionate about tall buildings, as he believes that this typology enables denser urban living whilst unlocking land for broader community uses. He is also a passionate advocate on how we can encourage the industry to think laterally about how architecture can respond to societal needs. David ironically thinks that he is one of Newcastle's best exports, given his history of working for American architects. Other than David being a great commodity, he also competes with Newcastle Brown Ale, being one of the most popular exports from his beloved city to the US. And on this note, I'm delighted to introduce the very lovely and charming David Weatherhead. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Farah, and welcome, everybody. It's an honor to be HOK's inaugural speaker today. And over the next 25 minutes, I'd like to get you into an insight into ways that I've reimagined space for London. So, statistic pleasure. What do I mean by this? Of course, we all know that we're living in an age where we're being constantly bombarded by numbers and statistics. And of course, we also know we are living in a time where we're both producing and accessing more data than ever before. Most of us will have, obviously, a smartphone, and a lot of us, things like fitness trackers. You know, the data is a key part of our lives these days. But the question I ask is, what's the value of this data without a perspective? If we look at this stadium, which you may have remembered from a few weeks ago at the Super Bowl, we could probably hazard a guess if the stadium is half full or at full capacity. But can we really judge the difference between 5,000 or 10,000 people in a crowd? Now, this is a segue slide, bear with me. So these 2 pieces of art sit in my home, and I made both of them. One, Nelly, is made from hammering nails into wood. The other, Marnie, one of my cats, is made by assembling wooden blocks together. The point here is, although Marnie is made from 5,000 wooden blocks, there's twice as many wooden blocks there as nails. And I want you to remember Marnie later in the presentation. So remember Marnie, on the right, there's 5,000 cubes. So can we visualize large numbers without a perspective? We all know that the Earth is referred to as the blue planet, or the little blue dot, depending on our perspective. Our vast oceans, seas and polar caps, sometimes they feel so big. You can't quantify how big they are, right? But if we condensed all that water into a single sphere, the diameter would barely be bigger than the UK, really bringing home the point of how precious something is with a different perspective. And illustrating facts can really bring home a point. This example by Valentina De Filippino is called Poppy Field. And what this does is it represents a war since 1900 to the present day. The poppy starting at the time where the war started, and the size of the poppy representing how many deaths that the war sustained. So, avoid London? Here's a thought for you all this morning. When I think of London, I imagine that rich urban fabric, the variety of architecture and the vibrant mix of cultures. One of the reasons I came down to London in 2003 was how amazing I thought that city was, and how amazing I still think it is. I think it's a truly cosmopolitan city, and I hope it stays that way. And as I immersed myself with being an architect, through my research, I was alarmed when I discovered that there was over 2.4 million square meters of unused office space in our capital. Notwithstanding this, even more is under construction. So the point being is, why are we yet still building more? And should we be concerned? Is this something we should be thinking more about? And just to quantify that, to give that a perspective, that amount of area would give us 40,000 new homes, which is more homes than we've ever built in a single year in London. And so if we take that 2.4 million square meters, we can create a graph. This is what a graph looks like of 2.4 million square meters. And obviously, with the perspective, that's something a little more serious. So here it's represented as 8 1-kilometer tall towers. This highlights that statistic with a perspective. So the question I ask you today is, in a time of a housing shortage, does this seem ironic that this space exists? We are living and working with huge voids within that urban fabric I was talking about. Sometimes behind facades that might seem slightly anonymous. So it's the challenge that we cannot see that empty space, so we don't know it's a concern. And let's reimagine how our cities could look if that need was met. So the question I asked this morning is this because the buildings themselves aren't flexible or inherently adaptable? And of course, we're all familiar with the term vacant possession. Which leads me to my next point is, really, with all these trapped voids, how efficient are our cities? When we are buying a house, we all get this mark. So this is the energy performance certificate that we get. And it always tells us that our house is performing pretty low and we could have the potential for it to be a much better citizen based on various things, whether it's heat loss and insulating or having slightly more efficient lighting. And obviously this benchmark also exists for office buildings. In fact, office buildings have a score of A+ for net zero offices, a personal passion of ours at HOK. So what I'm asking here is, if we applied this table to our cities, what would our city score? Would we have an inefficient city with a huge potential? And empty floor plates, trapped voids, these all still warm up and cool down with the fabric around them. If you imagine this office today, if the ground floor of this office was not occupied, it would still have to be heated up because it affects the surrounding areas. And so really, could we drum this down to a very simple equation that a utilized building is an efficient building, and efficient buildings make sustainable cities? So what is a sustainable building? My rationale for asking this question this morning is, I believe a sustainable building is one we can reuse and repurpose. One of my architectural highlights of the year is going to see the Serpentine Pavilion. This installation sits for 3 months of the year at the Serpentine Gallery, and it's a celebration of architecture and design. Some of my fondest memories of architecture are seeing some of the installations that are produced, from Fujimoto to Sarnes. On the other hand, at Maggie Centre, these are small centres for patients, for support, for their families to go when affected by cancer. They've been designed by numerous famous architects. They produce a really beautiful and considered response to a very sensitive need. And so my question this morning is, could these buildings be the same? So on this series of diagrams, what you're going to see is 3 examples of a Serpentine Gallery in pink, in plan, at the site. So you've got Biggs, Toyo-Ito, and Herzog and de Meuron's Serpentine Pavilion. On the right is 3 Maggie Centres placed at the same scale on the site. So we know roughly the buildings are the same size. And what would this involve? Could it involve a process where the structure is designed to display all that celebration of architecture and design that the Serpentine celebrate? And by adding rooms, the building could then be used for a Maggie Centre. And I believe there's many advantages to this approach. Public awareness, cost saving, innovation, and maybe some more engaging design response. So I'd like to share with you a quote from Dr. David Batho. He shares with us that many individuals experience powerlessness when affected by cancer. He feels that they do not control neither their body nor their environment. So taking this further, could we adopt a new type of building that would actually look to provide something that Maggie Centre currently doesn't do, through a building that can adapt to any site and it can constantly change? Could the rooms themselves move so the building is never static? So I'd like you all to imagine the benefits that could be. And that's not talking about sliding walls. We all know the problem with sliding walls and what that could mean, especially for the person maybe on the other side of that wall. But looking more to how nature has designed itself through biomimicry, so as a petal opens and closes, depending on its need. And could this be adopted in a building? These plan drawings convey a design concept that illustrates how our buildings could potentially be more flexible and adaptable to suit a need. Whether the need is for a Maggie Centre with group therapy rooms that can move, that create a larger or smaller central space for fundraising events, for instance. Could this create something a bit more interesting and actually relate something back to the quote from David Batho about, would that help to empower the patient, also provide an architectural response which is somewhat different? And we all know the site at the Serpentine. I rarely see it without the pavilion there, so it's kind of interesting to note that, this is a beautiful site, and how could a pavilion structure be placed on the site for a different purpose, for a purpose which would have actual site in mind for its repurposing? And then how could that building transform to provide a new type of Maggie Centre? I believe the solution to rethink how we could use our buildings is one which is a challenge for all of us this morning. So if one of the many reasons that we have so much unused space in London, is it because our buildings are not flexible or adaptable? Should we be exploring designs that accommodate a multiple of uses? We usually design buildings to meet a specific need. This provides our cities with that rich urban fabric. But what if we reimagined this? What if we could put pretty much any function into the same building? Into a building that embraces change? And really, are the challenges technical, or are the challenges more societal? Are the things that we're just not comfortable with to put in a vertical arrangement rather than horizontally in our cities? I ask you, really, what's the difference between a hotel, student accommodation, housing, a hospital ward, or even a prison? This example is a hotel in Amsterdam that used to be a prison. And this is a new design by C.F. Muller in Amsterdam of a prison. So should we be reimagining the rules for a fresh approach? Could we develop a building that allows maximum design change to occur over time to suit the market or societal needs? Could this fresh approach bring our buildings, make them more usable, and therefore our cities more sustainable? So I'd like to share with you this morning my thoughts on how this could be imagined. Now, Flex was first conceived when I was involved with redesigning office space into homes and realizing there's an inherent problem that deep plan offices didn't really work with many other building typologies. So the concept was based on a set module that can be added to create a multiple number of combinations, whether the site is linear or more generous. In applying this concept, I'd like to use Waterloo Bus Park as an example. The bus park is a stone's throw from Waterloo Station in Zone 1 and currently houses 53 buses. Now, just for perspective, there's 8,500 buses that serve London. They're roughly 30 square meters in size, so just shy of a studio apartment. And only 7.5% are night buses. So that leaves us with 7,800 buses which are parked at night in areas, some centrally in London. And the amount of area required for that is 300,000 square meters. So I want to take you down to Cornwall Road in Zone 1, where Waterloo Bus Park is. The challenge I'm sharing with you is, can that site be developed to provide a range of uses maintaining the depot? Imagine a building that could adapt to the market, that could constantly change, not worrying about expensive fit-outs or changing facades. And one which is nimble enough to take difficult site shapes and sizes. And could this help to unlock some hidden spaces in London? And could the architecture respond more to the site and not the use? So does this approach allow us to use buildings for longer? With so much area in London which isn't being used, what else is the industry missing? So inattentive blindness is caused by focusing far too hard on certain aspects, by seemingly obvious, get lost or missed. And today we are constantly bombarded by that information, more than ever before. The result for many of us is we're being disconnected from our physical environments. Can many of you actually remember your walk to the studio this morning? Most of us do that on autopilot, either lost in our world of our phone or connected somewhere else. So inattentive blindness, it means we often miss things we would other question. I pass over 20 phone boxes on my walk from Charing Cross to the studio in the morning. Few work for their design purpose. Most are makeshift urinals or calling card dens. You might have even noticed Tottenham Court Road being pedestrianised for the last few months. And I've watched them meticulously lay the granite paving slabs around the retained phone boxes. And no one's questioned it. We just take it for granted. We don't see that as a problem. And the problem occurs through then inattentional design. So inattentional design happens when the need isn't met and the need takes over. Homeless tents and makeshift shelters they're exactly this. The need has not been met. And so the problem is they pop up in areas based on location and convenience. The reality is that our streets are being literally designed around us. And everyone suffers. And on the way to work, we're so distracted that we just take our streets for granted. And with all the advertising working harder and harder, billboards, street signs, notices, bus stops, information blocks and bollards, bins, phone boxes, they're all competing for our attention. And I feel the result means that everything just fades out. Everything neutralizes each other and gets lost in this fog of inattentive blindness. So what can we do about this? So intentional design means that we can actually come together and work out solutions based on a real need. So it may surprise you that 300,000 people in the UK are technically called homeless. That means they're either living in substandard living conditions or have no permanent fixed address. Over 1,000 people sleep rough on the streets of London each night. Now, in Victorian times, these people were given a wooden box. And we're not suggesting by any ways this is ideal. But over 100 years later, society hasn't really progressed very much. And would we really notice on a walk to work if the tent or the sleeping bag wasn't there tomorrow? In 1,000, that's not one of those big numbers we were talking about earlier. That's Marnie's feet, or paws, as I was talking about yesterday. It's not big. We can probably all imagine that, and we can probably all think that that's a solution we can probably find to sort that out. To put that in perspective, there's 19,000 bus stops that serve London. 13,500 have an associated shelter. And 3,500, that's about as many nails as was in the elephant, have solar power. So what if we could adapt that bus stop, that vital piece of real estate that sits on our streets, to have more than a single use? What if we could reimagine that? By taking the current situation, I'd like to take you on a journey of how I've tried to reimagine our built environment. If we take all of the clutter, all of the things that animate our streets, that don't really serve much purpose or use, does 3,500 powered buildings on our street give us some solutions to maybe they're not working hard enough for us? And what about that need I was talking about earlier? The need seemed to be about location and convenience. So could we think of a thing that has a location and convenience that might help to provide much needed shelter for those who have no other option? And with all the obstructions that we currently have, how could we reconnect back to our surroundings? So as you all leave the studio this morning, I'd like you all to reimagine your journey back to your places of work. And here's a closing thought for you. That maybe on that journey back, you see something that strikes a chord with you. And maybe that chord will turn into a passion, and that passion will turn and influence a project, and that project, that may change our built environment for the better. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very compelling. It's interesting in London because London's grown in such an organic way for since the Romans were here. So to look at how street and urban societies evolve, you could use any street in London. I think David really put together a very strong argument, very compelling case for reusing spaces, imagining the thought of imagining using telephone boxes for something else. It's something that sort of tugs on most people in the design world. We have to make the environment better for everybody. So yeah, really, really interesting thoughts and great to attend. First thing in the morning, get the mind going.
I thought it was fascinating to see that we're still dealing with a lot of our legacy issues when most of the conversations we're having about how we will be responding to technology changes. So we were speaking with Jaguar recently, and they were saying that their ambition is to have 50% electric vehicles by 2025, and the biggest problem they have is that no one's designing in the infrastructure, the capability within our cities. So I've been really interested to hear about how we will be addressing those. But actually, when David started to talk about all the things which are still littering our high streets and are completely taken for granted, it seemed that we've still got a lot of other problems which we've got to deal with before we move on. Being here this morning reminds you how important it is that people are thinking about this. They are not just responding to the projects in hand, but they're thinking about our cities and actually the challenges we face and how we can think differently about how we all live, work and play in them.
I really enjoyed listening to the talk this morning, and the key thing for me was just how many diverse sort of perspectives were drawn into this quite coherent narrative. We'd talk a lot about adaptability, sustainability, but trying to bring those things together and really thinking about design, solving problems. Listening to David talk at the end in quite a sort of personal perspective about how nature is important for him, how it's influenced where he lives, and how he wants to bring some of that sort of value of nature into his design. I think that's something that really resonates for me, and I think it's fantastic that someone in that design leadership role is really taking that seriously and embedding it in projects.